It is 2011, and Anonymous has just initiated Operation Darknet. This involved launching attacks against abuse websites, publicly shaming them, and calling their users disgusting degenerates. This move was highly praised, but what they didn't realize is that it unintentionally worked like an advertisement. Anonymous was criticizing these websites, but they had also just made them famous in the process, and the news reached some of the wrong individuals. One of those people, known only by his username Lux, began to download the Tor browser, and he entered the dark web for the first time. He became intrigued by the horrific videos he found there, marking the start of an offender who would become one of the most depraved individuals to ever walk the earth. This is the story of the worldwide hunt for the King of Hurtcore and the twisted man behind the online persona known as Lux. At first, I felt ashamed in myself for being attracted to such a thing, but as time went on, I slowly grew more accepting of myself. This is Lux describing his attraction to minors. When he accessed the dark web, he found an endless supply of videos of this type, and over time, it seems that he became desensitized to it. He quickly got to the point where he was, quote, able to feel comfortable with these attractions. After fully submerging himself in the dark web, though, Lux actually began to complain. It seems that he was really bothered by two major problems that he had noticed on these websites. Problem number one is that they lacked proper security, and as a computer expert himself, he knew that they needed to do better. He was probably worried about getting caught as a user, but he also realized that the website owners would be very concerned about their anonymity. Therefore, he gladly offered up his technical skills to improve their security measures, and this seemed to make his status rise very quickly, to the point where his skills became in demand. After all, security had just become especially important because Operation Darknet was drawing so much attention from the general public. It seemed that Lux really enjoyed being in demand, and as time went on, he got even more inquiries from website owners. He went on to work on many of the top sites, and he even educated other users on how to do basic things like stripping the metadata out of video uploads. After gaining a little more notoriety, Lux decided it was time to tackle the second problem on his list. He was upset that he couldn't find videos involving pain. A few months after entering the dark web, he had probably watched hundreds of videos, but since these sites had banned people from posting harm, it might have felt too vanilla for him. Lux wanted something extreme, and because nobody else would do it, he began to develop his own suite of websites that would host this type of content. He thought that this would bring him even more fame and power within the community, and chillingly, he would turn out to be correct. In 2012, Lux published multiple sites of his own creation onto the dark web. These sites pioneered a relatively new genre called Hurtcore, which comes from combining the two words hurt and hardcore. In addition, all of his sites were exclusively CP. He quickly became known as the best source for such content, and hundreds of users flooded in to watch all of the videos. I cannot really add any more detail about the stuff that was being posted, but you can basically just assume it was the worst type of criminal content imaginable. It was accurately described this way in a Vice headline. With a couple of websites now being fully established, Lux and his Hurtcore videos began to draw significant attention from law enforcement. They felt that they needed to take action soon, as Operation Darknet and the Silk Road drama had substantially increased traffic onto the dark web. By 2013, the FBI made a big move as they seized control and then shut down the biggest CP server known as Freedom Hosting. Lux was using this exact service to run his websites, so in one quick action, all of his Hurtcore was taken down. The FBI had even planted custom malware designed to identify visitors prior to shutting down the servers, so this became a turning point in the community as dozens of people were identified and exposed. Unfortunately for the FBI, Lux was not exposed by this malware though, and after a surprisingly short time, he was actually able to recover and re-establish his websites. He did this by investing in his own personal hosting service, and he proceeded to migrate all of his sites and activities over there to bring them back online. Evidently, he was extremely proud of this move, and he went on to taunt the FBI. Well, it looks like the Empire hasn't fallen yet. To any law enforcement agency who may be reading this, F you. You cannot keep us down, and every time you try, we will just get bigger and bigger. So thanks for the publicity and leading more pedophiles to where you can't catch them. To my fellow peers, it won't be long now until all of the major CP sites are back up and running. Following this message, it seems that Lux doubled down and he opened more and more sites to host his Hurtcore content. He actually made so many new websites that he declared it now constituted an empire, referring to his portfolio as the Pedo Empire. This included his most infamous site named Hurt to the Core, alongside other similar names that also referenced the Hurtcore genre. He was obsessed with building out this suite of websites and spent hours every night trying to optimize every detail, even though he feared that this would inevitably have consequences. The takedown of Freedom Hosting was a huge win for the FBI and global law enforcement, but after Lux taunted them and created his own personal hosting service, the hunt intensified. It was clear that the Hurtcore content was even more extreme and brutal than the stuff on Freedom Hosting, so it became a high priority. Lux was added to the list of the FBI's most wanted offenders. However, as they began digging, the investigators quickly discovered that getting any information on Lux was incredibly difficult. Although he was seen active on the websites for hours every day, there seemed to be conflicting information regarding his identity. For example, the timestamps on his activity suggested that he might be located in the Southern Hemisphere, but when reviewing his messages, they realized that Lux claimed to be a doctor from the United States. Many of his posts made reference to how he was a 50-year-old pediatrician, and he explained how his regular interaction with children would give him the perfect environment for exploitation. In multiple posts, he claimed to have a 6-year-old girlfriend. With these statements aside though, Lux was very good at hiding his personal details, and he would never visually show himself on any of the websites. The FBI and other agencies used a bunch of different tactics to identify him, but it felt like they were searching for a ghost. They definitely kept trying though, because they were motivated to catch the man they considered one of the most prolific offenders ever. The Lux Empire would continue to grow as time went on, with the new additions demonstrating new levels of depravity. One site he built was a Wikipedia, except it was specifically dedicated to MAPs, or minor attracted persons. This wiki contained 600 articles on topics surrounding exploitation, and over 1,000 users went on to make contributions to the site. Their contributions defined and provided examples of Hurtcore content, and also guides on how to create your own. There was even a section on how to dispose of remains. Lux probably saw this as like a complimentary handbook to help explain the things that people saw on the other websites. And by framing it as an educational resource, the wiki almost seemed to normalize everything in the empire. It became quite popular, to the point where the wiki was visited over 3 million times. Many of the Empire's websites were considered evil, but none of them were as disturbing or as popular as Hurt to the Core. The site hosted videos and had forums where users would interact, but it was really the practices and the rules that made it stand out. All new users would be restricted to only the surface level with a very limited amount of content. In order to gain access to the so-called premium areas, they would need to create and upload their own original content, and it would need to be verifiably never seen on the internet before. There were even higher ranking areas called producers' lounges, and they would include the worst types of content, as these people would share their own personal experiences making these videos and give tips on how others could do the same. This tier required proof of original production, and they would usually do this by having a subject hold up a sign with the website's name. Based on the website activity, it seems that in order to create the content, some of these users would take advantage of their jobs that gave them special access. For example, one user who went by Jabber worked in a facility for mentally impaired children in the UK. More evidence that was found on the forum side of the website was equally as concerning. One investigation found a post where children were allegedly being rented for the price of $4,000, or alternatively, just sold into slavery for $10,000. The user confirmed that he had personally spent around $30,000, and he even had to pay extra as a penalty because they did not survive. Because Lux was still obsessed with security, users who did not submit original content would eventually be labeled as leeches, and they would basically be banned from Hurt to the Core. These banned people would only have access to the front page, and this made the rest of the website have a very exclusive feel that led to many users being competitive and creating their own content. There were literally ranks and leaderboards to gamify everything and give recognition to the most active users. This overall security system basically made the website impenetrable for law enforcement, because whenever an agent would try to join and pose as a user to perhaps gain some information on the site, they would simply get kicked out and labeled as a leech, since obviously the agent would not be contributing their own videos. They would never be able to access the higher ranks of the community that were locked behind contributions, and thus, Lux continued to evade capture. By approximately this point in time, Lux was on cloud 9. He apparently had delusions of omnipotence and grandiosity. Not only was he a renowned security expert in the community, but he also owned the largest empire of Hurtcore content on the dark web. He boasted that his sites had a global reach with 400,000 hits per day, and Hurt to the Core alone had 15,000 daily video downloaders. He was the super admin of all of these massive communities and bragged about his accolades, saying he had, quote, complete control over the largest group of proven producers on any site. He also stroked his ego by strictly moderating all of these communities himself, banning anyone who broke the rules or uploaded bootleg content. Even among the other suspect users of the dark web, Lux was feared, and his influence was respected. Universally, he was now considered the King of Hurtcore. Because he had become one of the most famous people active on the dark web, Lux started to make connections with other notable individuals from similar communities. From among those people, he became close with Peter Scully, who remains perhaps the most infamous and despised content producer of all time. Lux had reached out to him because he was interested in obtaining one of his creations, which is known as one of the darkest and most brutal Hurtcore videos ever created. Known as Daisy's Destruction, or DD, the film had only been seen by a select few, and Lux made it his ultimate goal to obtain a copy of it and then host it on Hurt to the Core. He made countless inquiries in order to achieve this goal, and he was connected eventually with a production company called No Limits Fun, and they claimed to have Daisy's Destruction in their possession. Lux started off the negotiations by offering them $900 in Bitcoin, an offer that was immediately rejected. Apparently, the going rate was at least $10,000 to view the film. Perhaps due to this insultingly low offer, the business relationship between these two parties quickly deteriorated after that discussion. Despite this initial failure though, Lux did not give up, and sure enough, he was eventually able to obtain a few short sections of the film from another unknown source. It seemed that in his mind though, this was all he needed. He knew that if he released the footage for free, he would simultaneously get revenge on No Limits Fun and also become even more powerful. As he slowly began releasing the footage, it turned out to be just as horrifying as the rumors suggested. The subject of the video was 18 months old. It became known as, quote, one of the worst things you could see. From his perspective though, Lux had just delivered the most infamous Hurtcore video in the history of the internet, and he had done what everyone thought was impossible. He considered this a huge win as it skyrocketed him to popularity within his community, but also other communities began to hate him. Even among MAPs on the dark web, many of them drew the line at Hurtcore. They were totally fine with the so-called ordinary forms of content that they saw on other websites, but the extreme level of stuff that Lux was now hosting began to be seen as unethical, even in these types of communities. The release of the Daisy's Destruction film was the tipping point for some of them as well, making the name Lux now synonymous with cruelty. His reputation became tied to hosting, encouraging, and enabling the torture of hundreds and potentially even thousands. Going forward, Lux began to receive about a dozen death threats every week. Obviously though, none of those people could actually follow through with their threats, as they had no idea who Lux really was. In order to address some of the criticisms that he was receiving, Lux opened up a new website called Love to the Core, which was basically a sister site to Hurt to the Core. The site had exactly the same structure, but it didn't allow the same harm-related content that offended so many people in the community. He called it the softer side of his empire, but even then, the Lux reputation kept some people away. One member said, "It ain't worth being associated with someone personally responsible for the distribution of Daisy's Destruction." It seemed that, at this point, Lux really was the most hated man on the dark web. Especially following the escalation of his crimes, the FBI and other law enforcement were spending more time than ever hunting for Lux. They managed to identify and arrest several of his associates within the community, but unfortunately, those people also had no way to identify him. The FBI investigations continued to come up empty until finally they caught a break in 2014. They had received an anonymous report that had a lead, and it even suggested that Lux might be located in Melbourne, Australia. This obviously did not line up with his whole story about being a doctor from the United States, but the time zone did roughly align with the hours that he was active on his websites. This seemed to make the FBI very hopeful, So they launched a joint investigation involving Interpol and the Victorian police to further investigate the matter. It was now a full-scale international manhunt, and it all stemmed from that small little tip that might have even come from one of Lux's haters. Lux certainly knew that he was a prime target for the FBI, and he had continued to taunt them. At this point in time, though, he somehow felt that law enforcement was closing in. He saw many of his close friends get arrested, and maybe he thought that he would be next. It remains unclear exactly what caused him to feel this way, but what was clear is that Lux was spooked, and he was afraid that he might soon be captured. Hearing that the end was near, he sent out a final desperate email to the FBI's cybercrimes tip line. My name is Lux, and not only do I run the largest online suite of CP websites on Tor, but I also have a knowledge about its users and their identities, unrivaled to anyone out there. I am sure that access to this, let alone everything else I am offering you, is merit for the conditions I will outline below. After that, he demanded $50,000 in Bitcoin and complete immunity in all jurisdictions around the world in exchange for handing over his pedo empire. The ability to control the online persona and identify thousands of other users would definitely be helpful, but the FBI wanted Lux himself, and they were not willing to give him immunity and a bunch of money. In other words, they had no interest in accepting this bizarre offer, and they were still following up on that anonymous tip. Lux was evidently very angry about this rejection, replying to the email with, "It is clear you are not taking my offer seriously," along with other pleas for the FBI to reconsider. They predictably did not oblige, and then Lux found himself in a difficult position. He obviously loved the power and attention that he was receiving from the dark web community, but at the same time, he was paranoid that his identity could be exposed if he continued much longer. And so, with that in mind, Lux made the announcement that he was shutting down Pedo Empire on June 24th, 2014. He felt that this was necessary to avoid capture. Today is the day that I walk away. There are personal issues which my close friends have been made aware of that have forced me to make this decision. It turned out that the so-called personal issues were just code for not wanting to go to prison, but regardless, the Lex Empire was officially no more. All empires eventually fall, and today is the day that the Pedo Empire falls. I don't like long, awkward farewells, so goodbye. Members of his communities posted content in his honor, with one user posting an image of his 9-year-old niece holding up a note that read, "Lux, you'll be missed." The King of Hurtcore had simply vanished overnight and retreated to posting on other accounts in order to avoid detection. Still building off of that anonymous tip, law enforcement had narrowed their list of suspects down to just one. After years of looking, they were confident that they now had their man. An officer said, "For sure we knew who it was," as they closed in on a house in Melbourne, Australia. Based on their research, the house contained a white male in his 50s, along with his wife, son, and daughter. The man was a working-class mechanic, and his age and time zone aligned with the Lux persona, even though he didn't actually turn out to be a doctor. As officers approached the house, nothing really appeared to be out of the ordinary. It was just an average-looking cul-de-sac in the suburbs, and as they searched the house and basically turned the entire place upside down, they realized they had made a serious mistake during their investigation. They learned that their suspect, the 50-year-old man, appeared to know literally nothing about computers. Police were confused because just hours earlier they were feeling confident. So they started digging a little deeper by talking to the rest of his family. His wife and daughter were almost certainly not behind the Lux persona, so that is when the son became a new primary suspect. He was a 21-year-old who rarely left his room, struggled to make friends, and spent endless hours on World of Warcraft. He also had literally no presence on any social media, and police considered this very odd given that he was terminally online. Given his age, it was also considered unheard of to not be on at least one social platform. Unfortunately for the police, they had very little evidence that the mechanic's son was actually Lux. They asked him to unlock his laptop and hand over his other electronics, but he refused, and they didn't have enough proof to forcibly take away all his equipment or even make a full arrest. Police were about to turn away empty-handed, but that is precisely when he made a critical mistake. The 21-year-old voluntarily decided to unlock his phone and let police take a look at what was inside. At first, they found literally nothing, and that is precisely why he offered to hand it over. There was no evidence of any kind. However, when they looked really carefully and inspected the data inside of the phone's cache, they found that it had 3 images of CP. That content, hidden inside the temporary memory, was just enough evidence for them to arrest the son, named Matthew Graham. At this point, it seemed very likely that Matthew was indeed behind the Lux persona, and he was charged with possessing the images. However, the Victorian police were not able to break through the encryption on his computer, and with only 3 images to use as evidence, they were not going to be able to hold him indefinitely. If they couldn't find anything else, he was going to be released, and this was a huge problem because that would give Matthew a chance to erase any additional evidence and effectively wipe his slate clean. Because they were now extremely motivated to break into his hard drives as fast as possible, police sent one of the drives to Europol in Germany and another to the FBI in Washington, D.C. It is unclear exactly what happened after that because the court records are redacted, but eventually, the FBI was able to uncover irrefutable proof that Lux was Matthew Graham. Armed with this confirmation, an investigator proceeded to pay him a visit in Australian jail, and Lux was given an ultimatum. He was either going to be charged with all of the crimes related to running his empire in the United States, or he could stay in Australia, but only if he openly admitted to everything. He decided to remain in Australia after some consideration, and he also had to hand over his password, which was 64 characters long. Finally, law enforcement now had access to his hard drives, and as expected, they found huge amounts of CP and incriminating evidence. Lux pleaded guilty to 13 charges in court, and during his trial, even more strange details came to light. Lux described himself as a, quote, strong believer in free speech, and according to him, this justified all of his behavior. He even denied that he had any interest in children at all, instead describing himself as asexual, even though that seemed incredibly unlikely. It seemed even less likely when they realized he had previously admitted he was attracted to 10-year-olds while speaking to a US journalist. During the trial, Matthew's parents were shocked to uncover that he had built this entire empire under their roof, because they were just under the impression that he was gaming all day. They sobbed in disbelief as more and more information was uncovered, and later on, they found graffiti in his closet reading, "Parents should be afraid of raising children like us." One of Lux's most notable charges was aiding and abetting crimes committed in Russia. He was in close contact with an abuser who proceeded to carry out an abduction and ultimately a murder. Lux advised him exactly what to do, how to record it, and even promised a monetary incentive. "I have many contacts willing to purchase such a video," he said. Similarly, another charge referenced Lux encouraging the mistreatment of a 7-year-old from the UK who was disabled, mute, and in a wheelchair. He added, "If you record audio, then that can give a lot away, but it's good the fact that she can't speak. I don't think it's going to narrow it down." Another unsettling detail that came to light is that Lux was actively interacting with children in person very often. He was working as a babysitter for 6 different kids while he was actively running the empire, obviously to the surprise of everyone else involved. There is currently no evidence that he actually did anything to the children he was watching over, but given his other charges, it's crazy to think that he was frequently left alone with kids for hours on end. As a part of the trial, it became clear that the judge needed to view Daisy's destruction in order to properly understand what this case was about. The judge clearly did not want to watch the video and kept putting it off, but eventually he went into his chambers to watch the material. When he returned, he was visibly pale and disturbed. He said it was the worst thing he had ever seen, adding that Matthew's case was, quote, without parallel. Several people had to remove themselves from the courtroom because the mere description of the video was so traumatizing. It is impossible to describe all of the charges in a YouTube video, but the trial explored each crime in excruciating detail, and Matthew admitted to everything. At the end, the judge summarized his crimes, calling them pure evil, and he stated that this was, quote, the worst thing he had ever seen. On March 17th, 2016, Matthew David Graham was found guilty on all 13 charges and sentenced to 65 years in prison. Is what I was expecting to say during this part of the video. In reality, Lux was given a sentence of just 15 years. I truly fail to see how this is possible after everyone called his offenses, quote, the worst crimes imaginable, but he was also given the possibility of parole after 10 years. Since he had already served 570 days in prison at the time of his sentencing in 2016, this means that Lux is already eligible for parole right now, at the time of recording this video. Any day now, he could become a free man, and he is guaranteed to be reintegrated with society by 2029, when his sentence expires. When this news spread to the public, people from all over the world criticized the short sentence. On the dark web, some of his biggest haters were outraged as well, stating that they, quote, despised him. On the other hand, though, some celebrated the result, saying stuff like, quote, cannot wait to see him in 15 years. He'll still be quite young to admin a site, really. Others commented on how his sentence might have been different if he chose to be extradited to the US. As he is one of the most prolific offenders of all time, it seems that this could have resulted in a longer sentence. There is not any public information about Matthew's status as of today, and there is no way to tell if he will resume his activities on the dark web when he is released. One YouTube video claimed that Lux was seen using the prison computers to search for petite women, suggesting that he is not reformed in the slightest, but I was not able to verify that this claim is true. There have also been some more verifiable reports that Lux is being bullied and assaulted in prison by both the inmates and even the guards. Once they learned of Lux's crimes and realized they were dealing with the most hated man on the dark web, they did not hold back. Regarding the entire situation, perhaps the only silver lining is that multiple other predators were arrested based on the information that was extracted from Lux's empire. With him acting as somewhat of an informant, agencies were able to bring down other international offenders, leading to the rescue of 30 young victims. Because of Lux's actions, Australia also made a new law, making it a criminal offense to withhold a password to an encrypted device when given a lawful order to unlock it. Ultimately, it is concerning that Lux will soon be re-entering society, and it sets a dangerous precedent for other offenders. It sends the message that crimes like his are not treated very seriously. If the king of the empire is allowed to parole after just 10 years, how lenient is the punishment for his subjects?